I stepped into the coffee shop, the door chiming softly behind me. It was early in the morning, the kind of quiet before the world truly wakes up. The usual hum of the espresso machine and the scent of freshly ground beans should have been comforting, but today it felt different. I glanced around, instinctively looking for a seat by the window, but then I stopped. The room felt too familiar, yet wrong. It wasn't the furniture or the decor, it was the people. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes, or perhaps an odd sense of déjà vu. But no, there they were. Faces I hadn't seen in years, people from my past, sitting around the tables like they had always been here. Some of them were smiling at me, some were deep in conversation, but all of them were completely unchanged. There was Sarah, my old college roommate, laughing with a friend I didn't recognize. I could almost hear her voice from back then, the way she used to joke about the smallest things. At the corner table, Mr. Hartley, my high school English teacher, was reading the newspaper as though nothing had passed between us since graduation. And then I saw him. Adam. My first love. He sat at the counter, stirring his coffee, his back to me. I hadn't seen him in a decade. I wasn't ready to face him. Not now. I froze. How was this possible? These people were from different parts of my life, moments I thought I had left behind. I took a step forward, and a strange pressure built in my chest. It was as if the air around me had thickened, each breath more difficult than the last. I wanted to turn around and leave, to escape back into the quiet streets. But something kept me rooted to the spot, as if I was being pulled towards something I couldn't name. I forced myself to move, glancing down at the counter. A barista smiled at me, her face too familiar. It was Emma, the girl I had met once at a party, the one who had disappeared from my life after a single conversation. She handed me a coffee without asking for my order, as though she already knew. When I looked around again, the faces of the people in the shop seemed to shift, to blend with one another, like a collage of memories pasted together. I couldn't tell where one face ended and another began. The door opened again, and I turned to see a new person walk in, someone I didn't recognize, yet their presence felt just as familiar as the rest. They scanned the room and then locked eyes with me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something in their expression, a look that mirrored my own confusion, but then it vanished. They smiled. And just like that, I understood. The coffee shop wasn't just a place. It wasn't about the drinks or the small chatter of customers. It was a crossroads, a meeting place for all the versions of myself that I had left behind. The people weren't here by chance, they were here because they were all pieces of me, parts of my past, moments I couldn't let go of, trying to catch up to the present. I stood there, staring at the crowd of faces, each one familiar in its own way. They weren't just memories. They were the people I used to be, and in some strange way, they were waiting for me to remember. I took a deep breath, walked to the counter, and sat down. The coffee was warm in my hands, but my thoughts felt colder than ever. I've always been someone who notices the small details. The way a car's headlights glimmer through rain at dusk, or how the shadows of tree branches stretch across the sidewalk just before nightfall. It's part of what makes me feel connected to the world around me. But that afternoon, as I stood waiting for my train, I felt the wrongness of it all long before I could put it into words. It had been raining all day. The kind of rain that doesn't ask for attention, just the steady patter against windows and the quiet, constant dripping from rooftops. The city felt sleepy, lulled by the sound of water against concrete. People moved slowly, their faces blurred by umbrellas and the mist hanging in the air. I was standing near the platform at the old train station, the one by the river where the tracks curve just before they disappear under the bridge. It's the kind of place I've been passing through for years, but something about that day felt different. I don't know if it was the rain or just the hour, but as I stood there, I became aware of the silence around me. It wasn't that there was no sound, there were plenty of sounds, the soft rush of the trains, the shuffle of feet, the low murmur of people talking. But it was too quiet. Almost like I was hearing everything from a distance. I felt it in the way the air pressed around me, thick with humidity and something else, something harder to place. It was as if the world had paused just for a moment, letting me feel that strange, empty space between 1 second and the next. I looked up, and that's when I saw her. She was standing at the window of the train that had just pulled in, her face barely visible through the condensation on the glass. Her eyes were fixed on me, and there was something about the way she looked at me that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She was smiling, just a small, calm smile, as if she recognized me, as if she was expecting me. But I wasn't on the train. I was standing there, on the platform, looking at her through the glass, and she was smiling as though I belonged with her, like I was part of her world. I don't know why it unsettled me so much, but it did. My eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, and I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The train was just an ordinary commuter train, the kind that's filled with tired faces and the faint smell of coffee and wet coats. But this woman, there was something wrong about her. Not in the way she looked, but in the way she was. Her eyes were too still, too focused. Her smile was too deliberate. It was like she was waiting for me, but how could she be? I wasn't on the train. I hadn't even gotten close enough to board it. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. People were still walking past, oblivious to the train or to her, as if they couldn't see her or didn't care. That's when I started to feel it, that creeping unease, the sense that something was just slightly off. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, unsure whether I should approach or just leave. I looked back at the train window, and she was still there, smiling, still waiting. Her smile hadn't changed, but something else had. I could swear her reflection had shifted, just for a second, like her features were stretching out of sync with the image in the glass. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like my eyes were glued to her, as if some invisible force was holding me there. I didn't even realize the train had started moving until it was already pulling out of the station, and I saw her face disappear behind the sliding window, her smile fading as the train gained speed. The last thing I saw was her eyes, still watching me, even as she was carried farther away. I didn't know what to make of it. I couldn't explain why it felt wrong, why the air still felt thick with her presence even though the train had left. I didn't even remember when I started walking again, but I found myself heading out of the station, my feet moving faster than I realized. I tried to push it out of my mind. People smile at strangers all the time. But it was her smile that kept coming back to me, that perfect, calm, knowing smile, like she knew something I didn't. I stepped outside into the cool air, the rain falling in soft sheets, and tried to shake off the lingering discomfort. The city was starting to wake up now, the streets busy again, people hurrying past with their heads down, trying to stay dry. The world felt more real now, more grounded. But as I passed by the corner store, I happened to glance up at the reflection in the window. And there she was again. Her face. Her eyes. Her smile. She wasn't on the train this time, but she was still there, in the reflection, standing just behind me, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. She hadn't moved, but I could feel her, like she was tethered to me, bound to the space I occupied. I turned around, and she was gone. The street was empty behind me, the windows clear, the streetlights flickering as usual. But I knew she was still there, somewhere, just out of reach. The rain continued to fall, washing over everything, but the feeling stayed with me, like I was carrying something heavy, something I couldn't shake. When I got home, the lights were already on, though I hadn't turned them on. The apartment was too quiet, too still. I set my keys down and glanced around the room, almost expecting her to be standing in the corner, watching, waiting. But no one was there. Still, I couldn't get her out of my mind. That smile, that waiting look, asterisk, why had I seen her? Asterisk, and more importantly, why had she been waiting for me? I tried to focus on the ordinary things, the usual distractions, checking my emails, grabbing a snack, but the unease kept growing. Something wasn't right, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more insistent it became. I went to the kitchen to make myself a cup of tea, but as I stood there, I felt it again. Something was watching me. I turned, expecting nothing, but there, reflected in the kitchen window, was her face. She was standing outside, just on the other side of the glass, her face pressed lightly against the window as though she were trying to look inside. Her smile was still there, the same calm, unsettling smile, and her eyes, those eyes, were staring directly at me. I didn't move. I couldn't move. The tea kettle whistled, but it sounded distant, muffled, like the world outside my apartment had gone too far away. I took a step closer to the window, my breath fogging up the glass as I drew nearer. The smile never faltered. And then, just as I reached the window, she faded away. Like a shadow lifting from the glass, she was gone. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I had imagined it. I kept telling myself that for hours. But when I went to bed that night, I could still feel her eyes on me. I could still hear her breath, just beyond the glass. I don't know how long it took before I fell asleep, but when I woke, the feeling hadn't gone away. It's been weeks now, and I can't shake the feeling that she's still waiting for me, that her smile is still out there, watching, just out of sight. And every time I look at the train station from the window, every time I glance at the reflection in the glass, I wonder, when will she be waiting for me again? It was a quiet evening, one of those nights where the city's usual hum seems to disappear, as if the whole place was holding its breath. The kind of evening when even the lights above seem too bright, too perfect. I had just finished a late meeting, the kind that drags on without any real purpose, so I was eager to get home, to the comfort of my apartment, where everything felt predictable. I stepped out of the building and into the street. The rain had stopped, but the air still held that damp coolness, and the sidewalk was glistening under the streetlights. The road was empty, as it often is at this hour. No cars, no other pedestrians. Just the soft echo of my footsteps, the rhythmic sound of my shoes tapping against the pavement. But then I noticed it, the sound of another set of footsteps, close but not quite matching mine. I stopped, thinking maybe it was just the sound bouncing off the walls, a trick of the empty street. But when I continued walking, the footsteps continued right alongside me, almost in perfect time with my own. It was like someone was walking beside me, just out of view. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, anyone, there. But there was no one. Just the empty street, silent except for the sound of the footsteps following mine. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the feeling of being watched, but the footsteps matched my speed. I slowed again, and they did too. It was as if whoever was walking beside me was mirroring my every movement, my every step. The sound of their shoes against the wet pavement was all I could hear now, a constant, unnerving rhythm in the otherwise still air. I stopped once more, heart pounding in my chest. I turned sharply, expecting to catch a glimpse of the person who was following me. But still, there was no one. Just the empty street, the soft glow of the streetlights, the lingering scent of rain. I began to feel a strange pressure on my chest, like something was pushing down on me, filling the space around me with tension. The footsteps were still there. They hadn't stopped, hadn't faltered for even a second. I could hear them so clearly now, almost like they were right beside me, just out of sight, their presence so close it felt as if they were breathing in time with me. I could feel my breath quickening, my pulse racing in my ears, and I suddenly felt very, very alone. Alone, but not quite. Because whoever, or whatever, was walking beside me was there, in the space I couldn't see. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I turn around again, just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it? I decided to keep walking. What else could I do? I couldn't let fear control me. So I pushed forward, my footsteps moving faster now, the sound of the other set of footsteps speeding up too, matching my pace. I looked ahead, but the street was still empty, the only thing moving the shadows of the trees swaying gently in the wind. But then something shifted. The footsteps changed. They didn't match my pace anymore. They slowed, falling behind just a little. Then they started to linger, like someone had stopped and was just watching me from the corner of my vision. I glanced behind me again, my heart thumping in my throat. But still, no one. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't go away. It was still there, that creeping presence, right behind me, as real as the cold air on my skin. I could feel the weight of it, pulling at me, pushing me to turn around. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned, but this time I did it quickly, determined to catch whoever, or whatever, was following me. But there was nothing. The street was still empty, still silent, except for my own breathing. I stood there, frozen, listening to the quiet. Then, just as I was about to turn back and keep walking, I heard it. The sound of footsteps, asterisk behind asterisk me, but not in the way they had been before. These were different. These were hesitant, slow, almost hesitant, as if whoever was following me was unsure. And then, in the stillness of the night, I heard a whisper. It wasn't words I could understand. It was more like the sound of breath, like a voice struggling to form something in the air, just barely out of reach. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around, but there was still nothing. Just the empty street, the rain-soaked pavement reflecting the glow of the streetlights. I took a few steps back, looking around. My breath was coming in shallow gasps now. I felt dizzy, like the ground beneath me wasn't steady anymore. The street was no longer just empty, it felt wrong. Like I had crossed into a place where time had stopped. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted in place, my feet unwilling to move. Then I heard it again, this time, clearer. The whisper. The footsteps, slow and deliberate, now sounding closer than ever. Right beside me. I could feel the air shift. Something was there, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it, as real as the wet pavement beneath my feet. The whisper grew louder, the footsteps closer, but still, I couldn't see them. The air around me thickened, almost suffocating, and I realized, with a sudden cold clarity, that I wasn't alone. Not in the way I thought. Whoever was following me was no longer just behind me. They were with me. Beside me, just out of sight. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could feel them there, right beside me, but every time I tried to turn, to see, there was nothing. Just the empty street, the flickering streetlights, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The footsteps. The whisper. The feeling. Gone. The air lightened, the weight lifting from my chest. I could breathe again. The street felt normal again. I turned, my legs shaking, and made my way home, my steps quickening, the sound of my shoes against the pavement steady once more. But as I reached the door to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there. Something was still asterisk with me. Asterisk the silence of the street outside was back, but I knew, deep down, that the quiet wasn't the same. I had crossed into something that night, something that had walked beside me, unseen. And I would never be able to shake the feeling that it was still following me, just out of sight. It was a regular Tuesday, the kind of day that fades into memory before it even starts. The weather was cool but comfortable, the sky just the right shade of gray, soft with clouds but not enough to threaten rain. I had been at work all day, buried in emails and spreadsheets, and by the time I finally stepped out for a break, I was feeling the weight of the hours stacking up behind me. I didn't plan to do much, just a quick walk to stretch my legs, get some fresh air. The streets were as busy as usual, the low hum of traffic mixing with the murmur of pedestrians. I walked a few blocks, taking in the familiar sights, the deli on the corner, the construction site where the new building was going up, the old bookstore with its narrow entrance and crowded windows. It was the same city I'd seen 1,000 times. But then, when I returned to my apartment, something felt off. I live on the 15th floor of a building that looks out over the city, and when I opened the blinds, I expected the usual view: skyscrapers rising in the distance, the tangled maze of streets and cars, the faint line of the river that cuts through the heart of the city. It should have been there. I knew it should have been. But when I looked out the window, the scene was unrecognizable. The city had vanished. Instead of buildings and roads, I saw trees. Tall, thick trees that stretched upward, their branches reaching for the sky in every direction. The forest was dense, wild, and untamed, with no sign of the familiar skyline I'd always known. The green of the leaves was so vivid, almost unnatural, and the forest seemed to hum with a quiet energy that made my skin prickle. I blinked, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My heart beat a little faster as I moved closer to the window, pressing my hands against the cool glass. I thought maybe it was some kind of trick, maybe the city had been replaced by a giant screen, or a large photo, or even some kind of hologram. But no matter how hard I looked, it didn't change. The trees were real, the depth of the forest stretching out beyond what I could see, and the more I stared, the more real it became. I tried to think logically, to calm myself. Maybe the view was distorted. Maybe I was tired, overworked, and imagining things. I went to the kitchen and splashed some cold water on my face, hoping the fog in my head would clear. When I returned to the window, the scene outside hadn't changed. The trees were still there, blocking the view of the city that should have been in front of me. Panic started to crawl in, slowly but surely. I backed away from the window, feeling like the walls of my apartment had suddenly grown too small, too tight. I turned around, looking for something, anything, that could explain this, but everything in my apartment was the same. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, the familiar hum of the refrigerator, it all seemed to be exactly as it had been when I left for work that morning. But the window was wrong. I went to my phone, my fingers shaking as I unlocked it. I opened the camera app, hoping to take a picture of the strange scene outside, to show myself that it was real. But when I pointed the phone at the window, the screen went blank. No camera view, no reflection of the forest, just a black screen. I tried again, and again, but the phone wouldn't register anything. I ran to the front door, thinking maybe the forest had somehow encroached on the building itself. Maybe there was something outside that would explain it. But when I opened the door, I saw only the hallway, empty, silent, as it should have been. I stepped back into the apartment, my head spinning. The world outside my window had been replaced, but everything else was normal. Too normal. It didn't make sense. Then, just as I was about to check the other windows, just to confirm, to prove I hadn't lost my mind, I heard something. A sound, distant but clear. A whisper on the wind. It was soft, like a rustle in the leaves, but distinct. A voice? A call? I couldn't tell, but it made my skin crawl. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned, my eyes wide, searching the room for the source. There was no one there. The voice came again, this time louder, clearer. It was calling my name. I rushed to the window, pressing my hands against the glass again, desperate to see anything, any sign of what was going on. But all I could see were the trees, shifting in the wind, the shadows stretching across the ground. The voice came again, almost in a whisper, this time so close it sounded like it was coming from right outside the window, from the heart of the forest itself. I took a step back, heart racing. I couldn't understand it. I should have been able to explain it. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize the reality of what I was seeing, hearing, feeling, it was beyond anything I could make sense of. I wanted to leave, to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Something was keeping me here, keeping me tied to this place, to this strange forest outside my window. The trees stretched on, impossibly vast, and the whispers called to me, soft and constant. I looked down at the street below, hoping to see someone else, hoping to see a familiar face. But there was no one. Just the forest, filling every inch of my view. I pressed my hands against the window again, trying to calm my breathing, trying to understand what was happening. That's when I noticed something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. In the distance, deep in the forest, I saw a figure. A person. Standing still, staring directly at me. I couldn't make out any details, the person was too far away, just a shadow in the trees, but I could feel their eyes on me. The whispering grew louder, more urgent, as if the forest itself was calling me to join them, to step outside, to cross into the world on the other side of the glass. I stepped back from the window, my hands trembling. I couldn't stay here, couldn't let the forest pull me in. But when I turned to leave, I found the door had disappeared. The hallway was gone. There was nothing left but the four walls of my apartment and the growing darkness pressing against the window. The trees were no longer just outside. They were inside, too. The whispers were no longer just voices in the wind, they were inside my head. I stood there, staring at the figure in the forest, its silhouette faint against the shadows. And in that moment, I knew that the city I had always known, the world I had always understood, had been replaced by something else. Something ancient, something watching, something that would not let me go. And as the forest grew closer, the last thing I heard before everything went silent again was my name, soft and distant, carried on the wind, coming from the heart of the trees. I never saw the city again. I was on my way home, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting everything in the kind of golden light that makes even the most ordinary streets feel a little more magical. The air was warm, but there was a slight chill in the breeze, the kind of perfect evening that makes you slow down just a little, savoring the moment. I passed the usual spots, the corner deli, the old bookstore, the cafe with its always closed shutters. The street was quiet, save for a few people hurrying home or lost in their own worlds. It was one of those evenings where the world felt like it was standing still, just a little. As I approached the crosswalk, I saw her. At first, she was just another face in the crowd, someone across the street waiting for the light to change. She was standing there, looking down at her phone, her hair catching the light in that way that makes it look almost unnatural. There was nothing particularly remarkable about her, but something about the way she stood, so still, so present, caught my attention. I don't know why I stared at her for as long as I did. Maybe it was the way the light hit her face, or the way the world seemed to fall away when I focused on her. But as I kept walking, I found myself watching her, waiting for the light to change so she could cross the street, like me. But then something happened. She lifted her head, and for the briefest moment, our eyes met. I wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the way her gaze felt too steady or the way she didn't look away. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just looked at me. I should have turned away. I should have just kept walking, but I felt something pull me in. And then, in that same breath, before I could even think to look away, I felt it. A light touch on my shoulder. Not hard, not jarring, just a light, deliberate touch, as if someone was trying to get my attention. The kind of touch that seems to come from nowhere, and yet, somehow feels like it's been waiting for you. I froze. The strange thing wasn't the touch, it was the timing. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone close behind me, someone who had walked too fast or accidentally brushed up against me. But there was no one. The street was as empty as it had been before, save for the distant hum of traffic and the few pedestrians still walking along. I turned my head back toward the woman across the street. She was still there. Still looking at me, as if she had never moved. Still standing in the exact same spot she had been, looking down at her phone, her face completely unchanged. She hadn't moved an inch. I looked down at my shoulder, almost half expecting to see a handprint, or some trace of contact, but there was nothing, just the same empty space where the sensation had been. No mark, no disturbance. Just that lingering feeling of something, or someone, right there with me. I stepped back, almost stumbling, trying to regain my balance, but my heart was pounding. My breath came quicker, and the world felt a little out of focus. I looked at the crosswalk, then back at her, still standing across the street, as if nothing had happened. I had to look away. I couldn't keep my gaze on her any longer. It was like something inside me knew that if I kept looking, something would shift in the world, something would break, and I wouldn't be able to get it back. I quickly crossed the street, my footsteps quickening as I tried to shake off the feeling that had settled deep in my chest. When I reached the other side, I dared a glance back over my shoulder. She was still standing there, still staring, her eyes locked onto me in a way that made everything inside me go still. I turned away again, walking faster now, the sound of my feet hitting the pavement echoing in the quiet evening air. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that I had imagined it, that I had simply misinterpreted the moment. But the feeling didn't go away. It lingered, tugging at the back of my mind like an unanswered question, a puzzle I couldn't solve. The strange thing was, as I walked further down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see her walking just a few paces behind, but there was nothing. Nothing at all. Still, the feeling grew stronger. When I reached my apartment building, I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breath, trying to shake the dizziness that had taken over. I thought maybe it would pass. That the strange feeling would go away once I was home, once I was safe. But it didn't. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop thinking about it, the touch, the way she had looked at me, the way she hadn't moved. The longer I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. It was like something in the world had shifted, just slightly, but enough to make everything feel off. Later that night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. And that's when I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible at first. A knock. It came from the door, but not in the usual way. It was too quiet, too deliberate, as if someone was standing on the other side, waiting for me to hear it. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and I held my breath, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. The knock came again, soft, steady, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I didn't move. And then, from the hallway, I heard it again. The same knock, the same rhythm. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. I could feel her standing there, just beyond the door, as if she had been waiting for me to answer. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed to happen by instinct, as if the world had already decided for me what I was going to do. I had gotten up late, thrown on the first clothes I found, and barely made it to the bus stop on time. The usual rhythm of the street was there, distant car horns, the rustle of wind through the trees, the quiet murmur of people going about their business. The bus stop sign stood at the corner, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before, the same one I had been waiting at for the past few weeks. I had just missed the previous bus, but that wasn't unusual. It was one of those mornings where you know you'll catch the next one, but it still feels like you're playing catch-up with time. I checked my watch, 7:15 a.m. The next bus was due at 7:18. A couple of minutes. I settled into the usual routine, standing at the bus stop, half watching the street, half lost in my thoughts. The sign's worn edges were familiar, the metal frame a little rusted from years of weather. But as I glanced up, I noticed something strange. The bus stop sign wasn't the same anymore. It had changed. I looked again, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The sign now read 7:30 a.m. instead of 7:18 a.m. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but when I looked up again, the time hadn't changed back. It still said 7:30. I hadn't moved, hadn't gone anywhere, and yet the bus stop sign had somehow advanced 10 minutes ahead. Confusion tightened around my chest, but I shrugged it off at first. Maybe the sign was malfunctioning, or perhaps it was some odd scheduling update. I pulled out my phone to check the bus schedule, but the app froze. I glanced back at the sign again, still showing 7:30. I felt that uncomfortable prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I looked around at the street, trying to distract myself. The usual figures were there. The man in the gray jacket walking his dog, the woman with the red umbrella heading toward the grocery store, the young couple laughing as they waited for their ride. The same familiar faces. But something felt off, like I was watching them from a distance, a bit too far, like everything was moving at a slower pace than usual. The more I focused on the sign, the more the oddity of it started to gnaw at me. Why had it changed time? Why wasn't the bus coming at the usual time? I checked my watch again. It was still 7:15 a.m. My heart began to beat faster, the world around me starting to feel a little less solid. That's when the next bus arrived. But it wasn't the bus I was expecting. It was a bus I had never seen before, old, faded, its paint chipped away, and the driver's face obscured by the shadow of the steering wheel. The doors opened with a soft squeak, and for a moment, I thought about stepping inside. But something told me not to. The bus wasn't supposed to be here yet. It was ahead of schedule, but I hadn't seen it approach, hadn't heard its engine humming down the street. It felt wrong. Before I could second-guess myself, the doors of the bus shut with a soft thud, and it drove off. I didn't even notice when the bus stopped again. I was too busy staring at the sign, now reading 7:40 a.m., and I realized with a jolt that I had been standing in the same spot all this time. My feet hadn't moved. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that seemed to be settling in around me. But every time I looked at the sign, the time shifted forward, 7:45, then 7:50. My watch still read 7:15. I began to feel like I was trapped inside some loop, some strange cycle where the world kept moving but I was stuck, unable to catch up. And then I saw it. In the reflection of the glass beside the bus stop sign, I saw myself. I was still standing there, waiting for the bus. But the person in the reflection was smiling. A calm, knowing smile, one I didn't remember having. It wasn't me, at least not the me I recognized. There was something in the reflection that felt too familiar, like an echo of a version of me that didn't belong in this moment. I felt a chill race down my spine. I glanced away from the reflection, trying to convince myself it was just my nerves playing tricks. But when I looked back at the sign, it read 8 a.m. And the bus, the same bus from earlier, was back at the stop. The doors opened, but no one was getting on. No one was even looking at it. The street was still, silent, empty. Except for me. I looked down at my feet, trying to steady myself. But when I looked up, the reflection in the glass was there again. This time, I was standing just slightly off-center, a little out of sync with myself. The smiling version of me hadn't moved. And I realized that I wasn't sure if I could trust what I was seeing anymore. The bus's doors shut again with the same soft thud, and it pulled away, the street growing emptier by the second. The sign now read 8:15 a.m., but I knew, with sickening clarity, that no matter how much I watched, no matter how long I waited, I was still going to be stuck here. I glanced down at my watch again. It was 7:15. I hadn't moved. But everything around me was changing, faster than I could keep up, like I was living in a timeline that kept slipping out of my control. I reached out toward the sign, my fingers trembling as I touched the metal. And then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw something else. Something that made my heart stop. The version of me was looking right at me, right into me, eyes wide, a deep, unblinking stare. And for the first time, the smile on the reflection faded. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally turned away, I could feel something had changed. The street had returned to normal, but the air felt heavier now, as though the weight of time itself was pressing down on me. I glanced up at the bus stop sign one last time. The time had shifted again, back to 7:15. I walked away, but the unease stayed with me. The feeling that I had been standing still, trapped in a loop of time that wasn't my own. Every time I close my eyes, I still hear the doors of the bus shutting, feel the disorienting pull of time slipping backward, and see the reflection of myself, smiling, but not the way I remember. I'm not sure if I'll ever make it out of that spot. I don't know if I'm even meant to. But when I look at the clock now, I always double check. I don't trust the time anymore. It was one of those nights when the world feels softer, the kind where everything seems a little slower, a little quieter. The city lights glow like fading stars, and the usual hum of traffic seems distant, almost dreamlike. I had been walking home after a long day, the weight of my thoughts pulling me into an absent-minded rhythm as I passed familiar buildings, the same storefronts I had walked by hundreds of times before. It was late, later than I usually stay out. The streets were almost empty, and the only sound was the soft tap of my footsteps against the sidewalk. The sky had taken on that deep indigo shade, the one where the stars just begin to show themselves behind the fading twilight. As I walked, I found myself looking up, half lost in the beauty of it, when I passed by a window. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was because the light in the window looked different, softer than usual, or maybe because I thought I saw a shadow moving. Something made me glance inside. The reflection in the glass caught my eye, and I froze. I didn't recognize it at first. There, in the window, I saw myself. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like me, same height, same hair, same clothes, but the difference was in the eyes. They were wrong, not in a way you could explain, but in a way you could feel. They were too knowing, as if they had already lived through something I hadn't. And the face, my face, was not mine, not entirely. It was like a mirror, but not the kind that shows you what's in front of it. This face looked like it was from a place I had never been. I took a step back, suddenly feeling a cold rush of something, dread? Confusion? It was like a switch had been flipped in my chest, and for a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked again, my heart pounding in my ears. The reflection didn't move. It didn't mimic me or follow my movements, which is what I expected. No, it just stood there, silent, calm, staring back at me with those eyes that weren't mine. I could almost hear the silence between us. It felt so heavy, so full of unspoken words. The reflection didn't flicker. It didn't distort with the usual imperfections of glass. It was too clear. It felt wrong. And just as quickly as I noticed it, I found myself stepping back into the street, my feet moving faster than they should. I turned the corner, my pulse racing, and tried to convince myself that it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, some odd combination of too many hours and too little sleep. I reached the end of the block and stopped, forcing myself to slow down. I felt like I had to shake it off, to distance myself from what I'd just seen. I looked back down the street, toward the window, to tell myself it was nothing. But the street was empty now, no lights, no shadows, no sign of anything out of place. The reflection wasn't there anymore. But that didn't make sense. I stood still, my thoughts swirling. I hadn't imagined it, I couldn't have. There was something too real about it, something too tangible that I couldn't shake. The reflection hadn't just been a fleeting thing, it had been solid. It had been someone who knew me but wasn't me. I couldn't just leave it. I couldn't walk away without understanding what had happened, so I turned back. The walk to the window seemed longer now, as though the street had stretched out in front of me, pulling me back toward the place where that reflection had been. When I reached it, the light inside was dim, but the window was still clear. I peered inside, but there was no reflection now. Nothing. Just the quiet, empty interior of the shop. The shelves, the faint outline of a few chairs, the half-empty coffee mugs on a counter. Everything was still, frozen. But I didn't feel any relief. If anything, the stillness made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I turned away, my feet carrying me faster now, not looking back, not stopping to question anymore. I needed to get home. I needed to feel the familiarity of my apartment, my own space, where everything was supposed to make sense. The city felt different as I walked, like it was breathing differently around me. I could almost hear the echo of my footsteps, louder than they should have been, like the world was stretching just a little farther away. And just as I reached the corner, I felt it, the same odd pressure, the same feeling of something watching me, something I couldn't see. I turned the corner and stopped. There, across the street, in another window, was the same reflection. My face, my eyes, standing still, staring at me, except now the expression had changed. The eyes, those eyes, were darker now, deeper, and the smile was faint, almost too faint. It wasn't a smile of recognition. It was a smile of knowing. And that was when I realized, the reflection wasn't from the past. It was from somewhere else. Somewhere I had never been. I ran, finally, not caring how fast I went, not caring about anything but getting home. I never looked back, but I knew, I could feel it, that presence, that gaze, following me, just out of reach. The longer I walked, the more it seemed to follow, as though it was walking beside me, invisible, but there. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. The reflection, the way it knew me but wasn't me. The smile. The eyes. I only know that sometimes, when I pass a window, I catch a glimpse of myself. And in that moment, I can't help but wonder if it's really me I'm looking at. Or if it's someone, or something, *else*, just waiting. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where everything feels right at first. The sun was breaking through the clouds, soft light spilling into the kitchen as I poured myself a cup of coffee. The city outside was just waking up, the distant hum of traffic, the slow shuffle of people starting their day. I should have been in a rush, should have been thinking about the meeting at work or the errands I needed to run. But instead, I stood there, letting the warmth of the coffee cup seep into my hands, watching the world begin to stir. And then she came in. She wasn't anyone I knew, not in any traditional sense, at least. I'd never seen her before, but she walked into the room like she belonged there. Her eyes were calm, distant, like she had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. She didn't say a word at first, just smiled at me, a soft, knowing smile that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't explain. Then, without a word, she handed me a map. It was old, the edges frayed, and the paper itself looked worn, like it had been folded and unfolded too many times to count. There was something oddly comforting about it, though. Something familiar. The map wasn't of the city, not any city I recognized. It was a map of the streets, yes, but the names of those streets didn't match anything I knew. The intersections, the neighborhoods, the landmarks, they were all wrong. The places didn't exist. "You'll need this," she said, her voice soft, like a whisper of something that had been forgotten. "It will guide you where you need to go." I didn't ask her where. I didn't even question why she was handing me a map of a place that didn't exist. It felt natural, like I was supposed to take it, like I had been waiting for it. Her eyes met mine as I took the map, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind them, something I couldn't quite place, something urgent. The streets on the map were marked in a way that made my heart race. They twisted and turned in patterns that were unsettling, leading to places I couldn't recognize. The further I traced my finger along the paths, the more my mind struggled to understand. I looked back at her. "Where is this?" She didn't answer right away. She just smiled again, that knowing smile, and I felt a coldness slip into my chest. "You'll see. But you must follow the map exactly. Don't stray." And then she was gone. I stood there, holding the map, staring at the streets that didn't exist, trying to make sense of it. The city outside seemed to move in a different rhythm now, the sounds around me a little too loud, a little too sharp. But the map called to me, an invisible pull I couldn't ignore. I decided to go. I walked out the door, the map folded carefully in my pocket, and stepped into the streets. The world felt normal again, for a moment. The shops, the people, the cars, they were all just like I'd left them. But as I walked, I noticed something odd. The street names, the landmarks, the things I thought I knew, they weren't matching the map. The corner I turned should have been a different street entirely, and the park that I thought I was passing by looked wrong, distorted in a way I couldn't explain. I stopped at the first intersection. According to the map, I was supposed to turn left, but the street I was on didn't feel right. It was quieter here. The buildings, once familiar, now looked like strange, decaying versions of themselves, their windows black, their doors closed off with rusted chains. No one was walking by anymore. The city had emptied. The air was thick, and the sky above seemed to darken, though the sun was still high. But I didn't turn back. I had the map. I had to keep going. The map led me deeper into the city, through places I could barely recognize. Streets I thought I knew twisted into alleys that shouldn't have existed. There were no signs, no indications that I was still in the same city. The world around me felt like it was shifting, folding in on itself. At one point, I realized I couldn't remember how long I'd been walking. The streets had become less familiar, the buildings taller, the shadows longer. I checked the map again, but the streets now seemed to stretch out in every direction, endless, leading nowhere. I followed the directions anyway. Every step felt like a mistake I couldn't undo, but I couldn't stop. Eventually, I found myself standing at the edge of a cliff, staring out over an empty expanse. There was nothing in front of me, no city, no buildings, no roads. Just a vast emptiness. The map in my hands had grown cold, its paper more fragile than before. The edges were curling, and the ink was beginning to fade, as if the map was disintegrating in my hands. I looked around, confused, terrified. The place I was in didn't exist. I had followed every step, every instruction, and now I was here, standing at the edge of something I couldn't understand. I felt the pull to turn back, but I didn't know where I had come from anymore. The streets I had walked were gone. There was no way back. I pulled the map from my pocket one last time, trying to make sense of it. But it had changed. The streets were different now, new streets had appeared, streets I had never seen, and they all led toward the same direction. The direction I couldn't go. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps behind me, soft at first, like someone approaching through the silence. I turned, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The map was gone from my hands, blown away by an invisible wind. The city, the forest, the streets, they were gone too. I was standing alone, in a place that no longer made sense. And as I stood there, trying to breathe, I understood the last thing she had said, "Don't stray." But it was too late. I had already lost my way. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet moments when the world feels like it's taking a breath. The library was practically empty, just a few scattered people lost in their own worlds of books and silence. I'd been browsing through the aisles, idly picking up books, flipping through their pages without any real intent, when something caught my eye. A journal. It was tucked behind a row of hardcover books on a forgotten shelf, the leather cover worn and scratched with age, the gold lettering on the spine almost illegible. It didn't look like something that belonged there, not part of the neatly organized collection of novels or history texts. It looked out of place, a relic from a different time. I pulled it from the shelf, feeling the weight of it in my hands, the leather soft beneath my fingers. The moment I opened the journal, I felt a strange tug. It was as if the pages were calling to me, whispering from the past. The first page was blank, but when I turned to the next, there it was, writing, neat and precise, though the ink had faded just slightly over the years. I couldn't help but read it. September 12, 1998. I woke up late today, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. I've been living this life too long, and I'm not sure what it means anymore. Sometimes I think I'm just going through the motions. I wonder if anyone else feels like this. I stopped. The words felt familiar. Too familiar. The feelings described in the journal were things I had thought about many times, things I had written in my own journal just last week. I flipped the page, my hands trembling, thinking it was just a coincidence. But when I looked at the next entry, I was struck with a cold wave of realization. September 13, 1998. I've been thinking a lot about the choices I've made. I wonder if I'm on the right path. Maybe I've missed something, some important piece that could make it all fit together. I felt my heart skip. These weren't just thoughts that echoed in my mind, they were my own. The same questions I had asked myself 100 times. The same doubts. But how could it be? This journal wasn't mine. It was old, from a time long before I was born. Yet, the words on the pages seemed to match the thoughts I'd had in my own life. How could that be? I kept reading, turning the pages faster now, unable to stop myself. The entries went on, and each one was more unsettling than the last. The journal chronicled events from my life, my childhood, my teenage years, even recent experiences, detailed with a level of precision that only I could recognize. How could this be? How could someone know what I had been through, what I had felt, down to the smallest moments? October 5, 2002. Today, I walked into the library and saw an unfamiliar book on the shelf. It was a journal, worn with age, hidden behind the other books. I couldn't help but feel drawn to it, as if I had been meant to find it. I froze. My mind reeled. That was it. The library. The journal. My hand was still gripping the book, the pages seeming to throb beneath my fingers as if it were alive. The words continued, growing more personal, more intimate. November 18, 2019. I found the journal today, the one that describes my life. I'm not sure what to make of it, but I have to keep reading. It's like reading my own thoughts, my own memories, laid out on the pages. But who wrote this? Who knew these things about me? I flipped ahead, each page now more detailed, more vivid. Events that I had lived through, small moments that seemed insignificant at the time, were written in the journal with such clarity that it almost felt like I had written them myself. The handwriting was the same as mine, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The thought that someone else had written about my life, long before I could remember, sent a cold chill down my spine. The entry started to feel like a story, my story, unfolding before me. But there was something darker creeping in, a sense that this journal was not just chronicling my past, it was predicting my future. December 5, 2021. I feel as though I'm nearing the end of something I can't quite grasp. The pages of my life are drawing to a close, but I don't know what's waiting at the end. The journal's last entry will be mine. I will write it. My hands shook as I turned the pages, racing to the end. The journal was almost finished, the pages thinning as if the paper had been used to its fullest. I could feel the weight of the last entry pressing on me, the final words that would mark the end of this strange, unsettling journey. And then I saw it, scrawled on the very last page, the journal ends here, and so does this story. The one who found it will understand. I closed the journal, the sound of the leather creaking in the still library air. The words echoed in my mind. The one who found it will understand. But what did it mean? What was I supposed to understand? I stood up slowly, still holding the journal in my hands, my heart pounding. The world outside the library window seemed unchanged, but inside, I felt like something had shifted, something I couldn't quite grasp. The journal had described my life, my thoughts, my past, but it had also described my future. Every moment, every detail, all laid out as if it had already happened. But then, I wondered, if the journal knew everything about me, then why did it end where it did? Why was there no more to it? I looked down at the journal again, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something change in the pages. A new word, a new sentence, faintly visible in the dim light. I opened it again. Asterisk, the next chapter begins now. Asterisk, I snapped the journal shut. I couldn't hold it any longer. My breath quickened, my hands trembling. I had to leave. I had to get out of there. But as I stepped toward the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Someone who already knew what was about to happen. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city feels a little more distant, as if the hum of life has muted just enough to make you feel like an observer rather than a participant. The sky had that dull gray glow, a remnant of the sun that had dipped below the horizon, leaving only a faint trace of twilight behind. I was walking home from the late shift, the streets mostly empty except for a few stragglers, lost in their own worlds. The rhythm of my footsteps echoed against the pavement, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind seemed louder than usual, more pronounced. The streetlights above flickered, as they always did, but tonight, something felt different. They blinked in a strange pattern, off, on, off again, like a signal I didn't understand. I glanced up at them, annoyed by the flickering. It wasn't unusual, but it was unsettling. The deeper I walked into the street, the more I noticed how strange everything felt. The shadows seemed a little longer, stretching out at odd angles, as if they didn't quite match the sources of light. I stopped, trying to shake off the feeling of unease crawling up my spine, but it stuck to me like a second skin. The streetlights flickered again, their orange glow briefly turning into a sickly yellow before returning to normal. Then I saw them. Faces. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, an illusion that my mind was playing on me after a long day. But when I looked closer, I realized they weren't reflections or shadows of anyone passing by. They were in the shadows themselves, half-formed, distorted faces, staring at me from the corners of the alleyways, from the darkness between the buildings, and even from the base of the streetlight poles. They weren't just faces, either. They were watching me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing in my chest. They were too still, too quiet. No movement, no sound. Just eyes, asterisk, too many eyes, asterisk, staring out from the dark. Some of the faces were twisted, contorted in ways that didn't make sense. Others were simply staring, too silent, too familiar. I felt my legs freeze. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to move, to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. It was like the street itself had become part of the nightmare, like the shadows had come to life just to watch me. The streetlights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the faces seemed to get closer, emerging from the darkness, their features sharp and defined in the light. I could see every detail now, hollow eyes, cracked lips, twisted expressions. Some of them grinned, their smiles wide and unblinking, while others were simply blank, their faces voids of emotion. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, but no matter how far I stepped, the faces didn't move. They were tethered to the shadows, fixed in place as if they were waiting for something. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be there, someone real. But there was no one. Just me, alone with the faces and the flickering lights. I kept walking, faster now, but the street didn't seem to end. The distance between me and my apartment felt like it was stretching, pulling me into a place that wasn't familiar anymore. I could feel their eyes on me, following my every move, always in the periphery of my vision. It was as if the very air was thickening around me, the shadows extending further, closer, until I could almost feel them reaching for me. I turned a corner, hoping to escape the oppressive presence of the street, but when I did, I found myself back at the same spot. The same streetlights. The same faces. They hadn't moved, but I could feel them drawing in closer, like a slow, suffocating circle closing around me. I could hear my breath in my ears now, sharp and panicked. My legs were shaking, my body trembling with fear, but still, I couldn't escape. I looked down at the ground, unable to look at the faces anymore. I couldn't bear to see them watching me. But even when I closed my eyes, they were still there, behind my eyelids, still staring, still waiting. The streetlights flickered once more, but this time, they stayed dark. The shadows grew darker with them. I could no longer tell where the light ended and the darkness began. I was surrounded by it, engulfed in it. And then, in the deepest corner of my mind, I heard it. A whisper. A voice, faint but clear, carried on the wind. Asterisk, you'll never leave. Asterisk, I couldn't say how I knew it was coming from them, from the faces in the shadows, but I did. It was like the very air was speaking to me, the darkness itself alive with a presence that wasn't mine. I turned and ran, finally, my feet moving faster than I ever thought they could, but when I looked back, there were no more faces. The street was empty. The lights were steady now, flickering no more. But the fear lingered. I didn't stop running until I was home, the door slamming shut behind me, the lock clicking in place. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, but I knew one thing for sure, the faces would always be there, hiding in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. She handed me a coffee without asking for my order, as though she already knew. When I looked around again, the faces of the people in the shop seemed to shift, to blend with one another, like a collage of memories pasted together. I couldn't tell where one face ended and another began. The door opened again, and I turned to see a new person walk in, someone I didn't recognize, yet their presence felt just as familiar as the rest. They scanned the room and then locked eyes with me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something in their expression, a look that mirrored my own confusion, but then it vanished. They smiled. And just like that, I understood. The coffee shop wasn't just a place. It wasn't about the drinks or the small chatter of customers. It was a crossroads, a meeting place for all the versions of myself that I had left behind. The people weren't here by chance, they were here because they were all pieces of me, parts of my past, moments I couldn't let go of, trying to catch up to the present. I stood there, staring at the crowd of faces, each one familiar in its own way. They weren't just memories. They were the people I used to be, and in some strange way, they were waiting for me to remember. I took a deep breath, walked to the counter, and sat down. The coffee was warm in my hands, but my thoughts felt colder than ever. It was a cool evening, the kind where the air carries just a hint of dampness, and the city feels a little softer as the sun fades. I had been walking for a while, not really thinking about where I was going. Just letting the familiar streets pass by, one after another. The kind of aimless walking I do when I don't want to think too hard. It's always been my way of unwinding. I hadn't meant to end up there. It was the same bar I used to frequent when I was in town more often, the one I'd left months ago when life had pulled me in another direction. It wasn't anything special, a little dark, a little loud, but it had a certain charm. The neon sign above the door flickered lazily in the dusky light, the red glow giving the street an eerie warmth. Without thinking, I pushed the door open and walked in. The moment I crossed the threshold, it hit me. The same sound, voices blending into laughter, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of feet. The air was filled with that distinct smell of old wood, spilled beer, and something vaguely sweet, probably from the cocktails people were drinking. I'd been here hundreds of times before, but tonight, it felt different. It didn't take long for me to realize why. The faces. They were the same. The bartender, a familiar man with a slightly crooked nose, was wiping down the counter as though he had never stopped. His movements were methodical, like time hadn't passed for him. The group of regulars in the corner booth, they were still there, talking in their usual low murmurs, laughing over jokes that seemed too old to still be funny. It was as if nothing had changed. And then I realized, I hadn't changed either. I stepped up to the bar, my usual seat still open, right at the edge of the counter, where I could watch everything unfold. The bartender looked up at me, his eyes tired but familiar. "What'll it be?" he asked, his voice the same as it always had been. I opened my mouth to respond, but for a moment, I couldn't speak. It felt like I had just walked into the past, like I hadn't been gone at all. I wondered if I had even left. The city, the bar, the people, everything was exactly the same as it had been months ago, as though nothing had moved or shifted in the time I had been away. I nodded and ordered my usual drink, a simple whiskey, neat. As I sat there waiting for it, I noticed something even more unsettling. The music playing through the speakers was exactly the same song I had heard the last time I was here, the last time I'd made the decision to walk out. It was like everything had paused, waiting for me to step back in. The drink arrived in front of me. I took a sip, savoring the familiar warmth, but the sensation was dull, muted. It didn't taste the same. It was as if everything was too familiar, like I had walked into a memory that had overstayed its welcome. I glanced around, but something else began to unsettle me, the way the people here acted. They weren't just the same, they remembered me. I hadn't been here in months, yet everyone treated me like I had just walked in for the first time after a long day. The woman sitting at the far end of the bar caught my eye and smiled. I didn't recognize her, but she smiled at me like we had shared 1,000 conversations. It was comforting at first, but the more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. How could they all know me so well if I had been gone for so long? I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find when I came back here, but it wasn't this. The idea of coming back to something familiar, something comfortable, felt like a strange kind of trap. I wanted to leave, to walk out and break the cycle, but something kept me rooted there, something that made it impossible to turn away. Time hadn't passed. It was as if I had walked into a loop, a place where days were stuck, where everything was waiting for me to catch up. I finished my drink quickly, feeling the warmth slide down my throat, but the unease lingered. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe just an answer, or perhaps just a reason why I'd returned here. I stood up from the bar, not knowing if I was going to leave or stay. That's when the bartender spoke again. "You heading out?" he asked. His voice was the same, but this time there was something different in the way he said it. There was an edge of finality, as though he already knew the answer. I nodded, my mouth dry. "Yeah," I said, "I think I've had enough for tonight." The door swung open as I walked out, the cold night air hitting me like a rush of clarity. I turned back toward the street, hearing the faint music still playing behind me, but the strange feeling didn't leave. It followed me, lingering like a shadow, pulling me back to the bar I had just left. I stood for a moment, looking at the building, knowing full well that if I turned around and went back in, everything would be exactly the same as it had been. It would be as if I had never left at all. And somehow, that scared me more than anything else. I walked down the street, my footsteps quickening as I tried to outrun the feeling of being stuck in the past. But no matter how far I went, I knew I'd always be drawn back here, to the same bar, the same faces, the same moment in time. It was an ordinary day, the kind where everything moves in its usual rhythm, slow enough to let you think you have time, but fast enough to make you wonder where it went. I was walking home after work, the streets still wet from an earlier rain, the scent of damp concrete in the air. My shoes splashed lightly in the puddles as I made my way down the street, each step a little heavier than the last, the weight of the day pressing down on me. The neighborhood was quiet, as it always was. The small cafes were closing for the evening, the sound of their metal chairs scraping against the sidewalk mixing with the distant murmur of people talking. I passed by familiar faces, nodding to a few people I recognized, but none of them stopped to chat. The air was cool, the sky already darkening into that deep shade of blue that only comes just after the sun has set. It was the kind of evening that should have felt relaxing, but instead, I felt a growing unease settle in my chest, as if something was waiting for me, just out of reach. I was about halfway down the block when I saw her. She was standing at the end of the street, near the corner, her back to me. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another person waiting for a bus or standing still, lost in their own thoughts. But then she turned. I stopped in my tracks, an odd sense of recognition running through me. She wasn't someone I knew. Not really. But there was something about the way she looked. Her features were almost too familiar, like I had seen her 1,000 times before, in places I couldn't remember. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her eyes, those eyes, seemed to see right through me. She smiled at me, just a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a friendly smile, nor was it threatening. It was the kind of smile that feels like it has a hidden meaning, something left unsaid between the lines. Without a word, she pointed toward the end of the street. My first instinct was to look, to follow the direction of her finger, but the strange thing was, I didn't need to. I already knew where she was pointing, toward the alley I had just passed. But what struck me wasn't just that she pointed. It was the fact that the end of the street, the alley, was already behind me. I had just walked past that corner. I had been at the end of the street mere moments ago, and yet there she was, pointing toward a place that, by all logic, should have been ahead of me, not behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I took a step back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Her gaze didn't falter. She continued to point, as if I had somehow missed something. But what? Why was she pointing to a place that didn't make sense? It was as if the street had shifted, changed direction while I wasn't looking, like time had folded in on itself. I turned around, my feet unwilling to move, but my eyes glued to the space where the alley had been. It was still there. But the alley was no longer just a narrow, forgotten path between buildings. It stretched farther now, longer, darker, the shadows creeping in where light had once been. I felt the strange pressure again, the weight in my chest, the pull to move, to follow her gaze. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. It felt like I was caught in the middle of something unspoken, a moment I wasn't supposed to be part of. And then, just as I thought I might understand, just as I thought I might take a step toward the alley, she lowered her hand. The smile on her face never changed, but her eyes, those eyes, looked at me differently. There was something sad in them now, something resigned, like she knew something I didn't, something I couldn't see. She didn't say anything. She just watched me, standing there, as I stood frozen in place. The world around me seemed to still, the sounds of the street fading into silence. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I looked back at the end of the street, back to the alley that shouldn't have been there. But it was. It stretched further into the darkness, like an invitation I couldn't refuse. I took a deep breath and forced myself to look away. My feet finally moved, and I turned to walk away, but not without the strange, gnawing sensation that I had missed something. I glanced behind me, just once, expecting to see her still standing there. But she was gone. The end of the street was empty. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long, jagged shadows across the sidewalk. The alley that I had seen behind me was now just another forgotten corner, and the street, the one I had walked down countless times, was normal again. There was no mystery, no strange shift in time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the alley, the one she pointed to, the one I had already passed, had been something more than just a place. It was something else, something I had missed. I walked the rest of the way home, the unease settling in my chest. I couldn't help but feel that I had been standing at a crossroads, a place where the world had twisted and turned, and I had only just missed it. And as I unlocked my door, I realized, I hadn't been alone on that street. I hadn't been alone in that moment. And whatever it was that I had missed, whatever it was that I had ignored, was still out there. Waiting.